Do you ever wonder if you are making the right decision about what activities, what sports to put your kids in, when to quit, when to allow them to quit, when to encourage them to push through? Welcome to the Art of Plenty. These are the questions that we are diving in today because it's the season when I evaluate the past year of activities and I start thinking about the next year. What is coming in the fall? What is coming in terms of kids' activities? What has worked for our family and what has not worked for our family? And I always think, when possible, when you have a time, a moment to actually breathe and think about all of the things that you're doing and that your family is committing to, it is such a good idea to spend the time actually thinking about, is this something that we want to do in our family? Is this something that we want to continue doing for our family? That's what this episode is all about. If you were watching on YouTube wondering what I was doing with my eyes, I just realized I didn't do this one thing on the camera that I needed to set up. On the computer, I mean. So sorry about the distraction there. I really wanted to get that fixed so we didn't have any problems with recording. I don't know about you, but the season of life that I am in right now, so much of where we're putting our energy and our focus is into our kids. And a big portion of that energy that's going towards our kids are the activities that our kids are involved. And part of the reason why, as a family, we have decided to make that a priority and that we have decided to invest in that is I can't help but feeling that the opportunity that kids get from doing extracurricular activities is so rich in terms of what they'll be able to do in life. I can't help but feeling that when kids learn how to lose, they're better adults. When kids learn how to regulate their emotions, they are better adults. They are the kind of people that I want to be friends with. And so one of the beautiful things about sports, about extracurricular activities, is that it gives kids an opportunity to learn firsthand, to experience a lot of the difficult things that we need to know how to handle when we become adults, like working with difficult people, when things don't go your way, how you manage that, how you maintain discipline and grit and perseverance even when you don't feel like it. These are some of the things that I think sports give. As I said, this is the season when I look at our lives, think, okay, is there something that we need to adjust for next year? Where are we at? And I think a part of that is usually when we commit to sports. Oftentimes with kids, it runs for the whole season of the sport. And in our family, when you commit to something, you pretty much stick with it, especially when it has a finite end to it. Like a dance season ends in this time, or a sports team ends at this time. I think quitting is different as adults because we don't get the same seasonal markers in the things that we choose to do as adults that kids get to do in their own life. So I always think that this is such a great time to reflect on the decisions and reflect on whether or not this worked for our family and whether or not this worked for our kids. Now, one of the things that comes up for me is I have two daughters and both have done competitive dance in the past. And I only have one competitive dancer at the moment. The other one is no longer dancing. But dance is one of those ones that is a bit tricky for me. And I have friends that I can tell that they are not dance mom type of moms. They don't necessarily like what's going on with dance, and it's something that I see them not necessarily steering their kids away, but it's definitely not something that they embrace or pump up to their kids. And I think we all as parents and we all as adults have those things that we lean towards and things that we lean away from. And some of the decisions that I make for my kids, like allowing our kids and encouraging our kids in dance, it doesn't mean that I'm all into dance. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that's happening in the dance community. And I think for myself that that's a really important distinction. And the reason I think it's an important distinction is I have to come to terms that there are things about this sport that I don't necessarily like, and I don't necessarily like for my kids. And I find that if I can acknowledge that this isn't necessarily a fit, it makes it easier for me to embrace the parts that I really love. So specifically about dance, here are the things that I occasionally struggle with. One of the things is how excessive dance can be in terms of the amount of makeup the girls wear on stage, and in terms of the amount of energy that goes into the costume selection. Now, I am quite torn on this because when I was in high school, I did costume design for some of the productions, and I love all of the costumes, and I really get that the costume sends a message, and the better the costume fit is to the quality of dance, that you're sending a message about what the dance means and how you're interpreting the music. So I really appreciate the costume. And as a little girl, when I danced, because I was a dancer, but nothing like what my girls do. I took ballet for like a handful of years. I remember feeling an extreme amount of disappointment that my ballet costumes never had a tutu. I loved tutus, and that was a big reason why I wanted to dance, was because of how dancers looked, how they moved, because dance is a performance sport. And not having a tutu, not having that type of costume. I remember wearing pants in a costume. I remember wearing like just a flat skirt that really had no crinoline to it. No, it didn't stand out. Like, it was just like a very typical costume. I remember that being upsetting to me as a kid. So on one hand, I get the quality of costumes and how that makes a dancer feel. I can get behind that, but sometimes it does feel excessive to me. So that's been something that I've had to work through, because if I bring that opinion that this is excessive, my kids pick up on that emotion, and then it can rob from them the joy that they have. So part of making decisions as parents is, if you're going to do this, we have to reserve some of our judgment so that it doesn't negatively impact our kids. And if you can't get behind it, then maybe it's better off to find a different option that you can get fully behind. Because it doesn't feel fair to me if kids pick that emotion up and then they're wrestling with the things that we are wrestling with. That's not their responsibility to wrestle with the stuff that we're wrestling with. We need to wrestle with it, figure it out so that they can wrestle with their own stuff. Because kids got enough stuff that they've got to figure out and work out, never mind having to work out their parents' personal stuff. The other piece about dance that I struggle with is, because it is a performance sport, there's a real emphasis on how you look and what your body looks like. And one of the reasons that we chose our studio for the girls and the studio that they dance is because there's always been a message about positive body image, and I really appreciate that, because I know from my background in psychology that there are certain sports where the disordered eating and negative body image are more likely, and dance is one of those sports where that is more of a concern for girls than other sports like volleyball or basketball that aren't performing sports. So that's not something that comes up for me a lot, because we do a lot of work in our family around mitigating those elements of building positive self-image and recognizing that your body is doing these beautiful things, meaning that your body is strong and your body can move that way, and fueling your body in order to do the things that you need to do. So I think we've, as a family, done a lot of work around that. So that's not something that comes up, but it's definitely something that when my daughter was wanting to dance, that I was thinking about. How are we going to navigate, especially those ages around 12 and 13 and 11 and kind of that preteen, early teen stage, because that is a significant time when a lot of girls leave sport, not necessarily dance, but they leave sport because of the changes to their body. And I wanted to make sure that when we were going through that season, that we were navigating it in such a way that the girls were celebrated for the way that their body moved and not necessarily the way that they looked, which again is tricky in a performance sport when it does matter how you look. I mean, the whole thing about dance is people watch it, and that's not everything about dance, obviously, but that is such a big part of a performing sport. The other thing I've struggled with is that dance can be sexualized, and I don't want my kids sexualized, especially with my psychological background and I know about some of those nasty, horrible things that happen to children, and I've had to come to terms with that and figure out how much of that I'm okay with and how much I'm not okay with. And again, this is something that is something I have to work through, but it's also something that I have to protect my daughter with. And when you put your daughter in a routine or agree to a certain routine, you don't necessarily know what the music's going to be or what the choreography is going to be. So you don't necessarily know if their dance is going to be sexualized. And then there's the whole component of how does the dancer actually dance that routine, because you can make things more sexualized just by the innuendos and those kind of things. So that's been something that I've struggled with. But the reason why I'm still okay with dance is because there's so many other things that I really appreciate and value. Like, I think it's amazing that dancers give kids confidence and spotlight. I think more and more it's so important to be able to recognize how you're coming across and present yourself in a certain way. I see so much benefit for my daughters in terms of moving forward. They're very comfortable speaking and being in front of people, and that really matters to me because from an entrepreneurship perspective, I think that this is a skill that they're going to need in life and that they're going to need in university and that they're going to need in the work that they're doing in the future. So I love that piece. And one of the things that dance gives kids is a lot of body awareness, because some of the movements are breaking down isolated pieces, like which way is your hand moving, how high is your hand, and where is your body in space. And I think dance, similar to other sports and activities, really gives you an awareness of how to move your body in a certain way. But because dance is broken down and there are so many isolations in the movements, I think that body awareness is even greater in a sport like dance. And I can't get away from the artistic expression that happens in dance. And because I am a creative and because I'm an artist, I love that it's in a way that dance is a way to express emotion. And I think all of the arts are this way. Like, it's a way to move energy and pain out of your body and a way to release sadness and express all of those feelings. And I just think that's a beautiful thing, that you're creating something on stage. And I see that in other sports too, like I see that my kids, my boys especially, they're better humans, and my husband fits this bill too. They are all better humans when they have an opportunity to be physical. And I think what dance does is there's an intentional emotional release that comes, whereas in sport, the release in emotion just happens naturally. But in dance, there's more intention in putting certain emotions in and bringing emotions to the surface in order to release in the dance and create this picture. So I just love all of that about dance. And for me, it's been a matter of holding these two different perspectives at the same time. And because I have both of those, not just a negative view of aspects, but have a really strong positive, dance is something that is relatively easy for me to decide. But one thing that I really struggle with, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but it seems like the more we get involved in sports, the more opportunity in those sports there is. Like I said, I noticed a big difference from when I was in dance as a kid to what the dance opportunities are now. But it seems like every time I turn around, there's more that you can do. There's more commitment. There's more. And there's this feeling of guilt that if you don't do more, then somehow you're holding your kid back, or you're putting them in a situation where they won't be able to excel or make the team. I find this particularly true in hockey these days because there's so much emphasis on you play the season all year long, and then spring comes up and there's no break because then there's spring hockey, and then you go into summer camps, and then you go into tryouts, and then all of a sudden you're doing hockey year round. And if you're not doing those things, it's like you're holding your kid back from an opportunity to make a team. And the part that is the most bizarre to me about hockey in particular is the professional athletes and the track to being a professional athlete. Not that that's the goal necessarily, or like whether it's the goal or not isn't relevant, but this idea that you can be the best athlete that you can be if you engage in multi-sport, yet their requirement is to specialize early, that there isn't actually time for a multi-sport because they want such a high level commitment at such a young age. And it's so demanding, not just on the kid, but on the family. And the rate of injury is so much greater if you're only doing one sport because of the way muscles are developed and the strain that gets put on muscles early. I just really struggle with that one. And it's hard when I feel like I'm letting my kids down. And we've really emphasized that there's seasons when you don't do your sport and you take a break and you take time off and you do a different sport, and trying to get diversity in types of activity even throughout the year. But again, that pressure mounts, and it's not just from you feel like you're letting them down, but they also want to be with their friends. And like I was having a conversation with my son this morning, and he's telling me how much he wants to play spring hockey because he's little. This is the younger one. He wants to play spring hockey because all his friends have been playing spring hockey. And he just wants to be with his friends. It's not even so much about the hockey, it's about that camaraderie. And that happens in dance too, when you decide how many pieces that the girls are going to be in for the year and how many dances they're going to have. And then the list comes out and they're not on this one dance, and all their friends are on that dance, and they don't want to be left out. And so that is something that comes up for us all the time. So how do you navigate this? How do you make decisions for your family, for your kids, for you as a parent that kind of can hold all these things, and so that you can feel good about the decisions that you're making? So this is the list that I've got running that's helping me to make those decisions. So the first thing is to be aware of my judgments. So as I was saying, my judgment around dance and the things that bother me about it, having awareness about it enables me to make a decision with it. Okay, am I doing this or not doing this? And if I'm doing this, then how do I hold those judgments in such a way that they're not going to negatively impact my kids, so that they can actually be free when they're doing this activity? So that's the first one. The second one is to really be aware of the outside judgments, such as that feeling like you're letting your kids down if you don't do all of the activities, or that you're letting your kids down if you're not doing competitive and you're just doing recreation. And that somehow that this will be a detriment to them. Again, the first piece is awareness. Do I think that? And question, do I think that? And what are we getting out of it? And kind of just exploring that thread that is pulling back in that direction to really get a sense of, how do I feel about this judgment? Do I also hold this judgment? And if we don't hold that and we're getting the pressure from the outside, then it's, I think, super valuable to have that conversation with the kids. Like, what is it like? Do you feel pressure to do this? What is this experience like for you? And why are we making the decisions that we're making as a family? Because what that does when you have a conversation and everybody gets on the same page is it becomes an anchor. It becomes something that you can go back to when that feeling comes up again. Because a lot of these feelings that come up in regards to this are things that will be on repeat and on a cyclical basis. When that dance comes up that they're not in, then they experience that again. And it's helpful to revisit, how come you made that decision? And what you as a family are getting out of by not doing that decision. So if it's cost related, it's, well, we're choosing to put our money in other areas, and we're spending this much, but we're not going to spend this much because we also want to do such and such. And it's amazing to me how many of those things kids are receptive to when they get more of a picture, when they're given that responsibility and that ability to understand. And I'm not saying you tell them everything by any means, but it always amazes to me how kids rise to the standard, how they rise to the expectation. The other thing that I think is really important is to consider the kid. And I mean, I have 5, and they are not all the same, and they are not all like me or like my husband. They all have unique attributes. They all have unique strengths, unique giftings, unique things that impact their ability to, they all have unique things, and they have things that they have to work through and things that they don't have to work through because they're just naturally gifted in that way. And choosing activities is really about the kid, because that's why you're doing it in the first place. So really sitting with the kid and checking in, is this in their way of being? Because we want our kids to grow and we want to challenge our kids, but we also want to challenge and encourage them in the direction of the bend that they already have. And I think this is so important because it sends the message to the kid that you are valued, you are loved for who you are. When we don't consider the kid and we push them in one way or the other, or shut down their interests, or don't cultivate their interests, the message underneath the surface is there's something wrong with the way that you're thinking about how you should live your life. And there's something that's not quite right about that. So by honoring where they're at and honoring the individual kids' differences and the bend that they have towards certain things, we're basically saying, we accept you for who you are. And yes, we want to challenge you to grow. And yes, we want you to be the best person that you can be. But it comes from this place of loving you exactly as you are. And at the core, that's the message our kids need to hear every day, all day long. That message that when they get that, they are loved and valued just because they are who they are. When they get that, out of that is where everything blooms. Out of that is where creativity blossoms. Out of that is where their giftings really start to develop and grow, and they get to become who they're meant to become. And I just love that. And a part of that too is letting go of dreams that we have for them when their dreams change. So I really experienced this with my oldest daughter, who she didn't dance this last year. She didn't dance competitively. And so I just finished, we went through a whole competitive season where she wasn't there. She wasn't on the stage. And I have a sense of loss. I really miss watching her, but I know that I can't force her to go back because that would rob from her what it is that she's supposed to be doing in this season. So I really have to be mindful that I'm continuing to encourage her in her dreams, even when her dreams change and shift. And that is taking discipline on my part, because I have so loved watching her dance and I've so loved watching her perform. And the last element that I would say that is a part of this is that there's a real need to consider the whole family, because a family is made up of a bunch of parts. It's a bunch of different people coming together and encouraging each other and loving each other and challenging each other. And sometimes what is right for the family dynamic may mean that certain people within that family, you can't prioritize that over everyone else. So it's a matter of looking at this activity for this child. within the context of this activity within the family life. And I know there are certain seasons where we just need less. And so that means that everybody does less, or maybe one kid does less. And it's a matter of being flexible to the dynamics and the shifting that happens in a family. And that is hard to hold, because oftentimes along with that comes some disappointment. For example, my kids often ask for play dates. Can we get together? Can I go to this friend's house? Can so-and-so come over? And most of the time I have to say no. And the reason for that is because we have so many kids and so many kids in activities that it's really difficult to add play dates into the mix. Even if that kid happens to be free that day, it often makes it too much for our family. And so we often have conversations leading up to the new year of activities, talking about, as a family, how do we feel about doing this level of activity this year? Is everybody okay with this commitment? And really try to talk about what that's going to mean as a family. And there's an understanding now that my kids have that if we're choosing competitive sports, it means that our social time happens during our athletics. It doesn't happen in free time, because as a family we just can't support that. And if we were to move away from competitive sports, we may have more capacity as a family for more friend time. And so everybody is aware as a unit what that sacrifice and what that commitment is going to be. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm so curious how you as a parent implement and think about the activities that your kids are involved in, and how you make decisions around what you do. I would love to hear from you if you use a different strategy than what I talked about, or the different things that you struggle with when you're making decisions about kids' sports. Because I don't know about you, but it is a big driver in our life right now because of the ages of our kids. So much revolves around their activity schedule. And I would love to hear what you're doing to make that aspect of your life smoother. If you haven't already, hit subscribe so that you don't miss out when any new content shows up in the Art of Plenty. And just a reminder, this is meant to be entertaining. It's not supposed to supplement professional advice. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with your parenting and you're not really sure what to do, there are so many skilled professionals out there, and I would encourage you to get in contact with someone, because this parenting stuff is hard work and we need all the help we can get. So thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed day.